What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast, the ultimate sports history pod where hindsight is 4040. We're excited to jump into today's topic, but first, a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome to another edition of 4040 Shorts from the 4040 Vision podcast. This is our short form format where we cover a sports topic in anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Today's episode is a snippet from our Warriors What If pod, which covers the 5 biggest what ifs in Golden State Warriors history. This particular clip is about Warriors big man Chris Webber, who left the team after just one season in the Bay Area. He would go on to have a Hall of Fame level career with the Washington Bullets or Wizards, the Sacramento Kings, the Detroit Pistons, and would go down as one of the best big men in the 1990s. He should have been a Warrior for a very long time, but as you'll see in the podcast, there was a strange set of circumstances that allowed him to leave after just one season. Let's jump right into the pod.
So next one I have on my list goes a little further back in time, pre-dynasty to the 90s. It's about Chris Webber. I kind of went through a rabbit hole of bad Warriors contracts and saw kind of a correlation to Chris Webber and what happened there, because he ended up having a wonderful career. I know that he was traded on draft night for Penny Hardaway. For those that don't know, Chris Webber played on the Fab Five team at University of Michigan. They were very iconic. They were very cool. He averaged 15 points per game and 19 points per game in his 2 years there. He even shot 33% from three. So the Warriors on draft night gave up the 3rd overall pick and 3 future first-round picks. That first pick ended up being Penny Hardaway. And they were a good team. They still had Chris Mullin, who was an all-star. They had a young Latrell Sprewell. So they just needed a big guy to a franchise player with Chris Mullin.
Run TMC.
Yeah, like kind of post run.
Yeah,
TMC.
just post.
Yeah, they needed someone to fill that void. So here's what's interesting about the Chris Webber thing that I didn't know. I know he left, but I didn't know that they gave him this absurd contract, 15 years contract. Initially, this is what they first offered him for $74 million that gave him an opt-out the first year. It was going to be 7 years guaranteed. That was the first deal, and Don Nelson, who was the coach forever at the time, hated that he was given so much control and 7 years of guaranteed money. NBA contracts were insane back then. A lot of them are 6 years and up, which was kind of beneficial to owners. If a guy outplayed his contract, you have him at value, but you are screwed if they don't.
It's the infamous Scottie Pippen 7-year contract that he was so bitter about for so long. So
yeah. So Chris Webber, 15 years, but he has a clause that lets him opt out after the first year. Really a moronic clause because they traded away the farm to get him. So the rumor was after the All-Star break in 1994, he was considering using his opt-out clause, and Don Nelson was rumored to have said, "If that's true, I'm frickin' dead." So the team made the playoff. What's that?
It's just it just speaks to the sheer incompetence of the franchises. I don't know how you make that concession in any world where you, like you said, you trade the farm for a guy and you give him an out after a year. It makes no sense. Maybe you do that if you go all in for, like, if Boston did that for Anthony Davis because they think he's a missing piece and for a 1-year title run. But something like this just did not make any sense then. It doesn't make any sense now.
100%. In that first year he was there, they actually made the playoffs, didn't go anywhere. In the offseason, he's like, I'm going to sit out. I'm going to opt out. I'm going to wait for a new deal. And I'm going to try and get another first-year clause. Chris Webber, hard negotiator, really tried to flex on teams. But he didn't want to play center, and Don Nelson kept trying to play him at center to try and – so they tried to show, okay, we'll play a power forward. Please. So they traded away Billy Owens for a center named Ron Sikali, but it was too late.
Ronnie Cycli, yeah.
Cycli. See, I don't even know who that is. I was in kindergarten.
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading. So it was too late. They traded him to the Bullets for a Gugliotta and 3 first-round picks. So they end up getting their picks back. Warriors did not make a lot of good picks through the years. You know, Joe Smith, I think, was the only number 1 overall pick they got throughout that time, and he was all right.
Famous misses during that span,
Yeah,
Kobe, et cetera.
Kevin Garnett, yeah.
KG, yeah.
Tim Duncan.
We'll be here all day if we go do that.
So here's the outcome that I was thinking of. You tell me what you think about this. They make it work. Chris Webber stays. Maybe he restructures this contract to 7 years instead of that stupid 15-year contract. And they get Chris Mullin ended up going to the Pacers and playing a couple of years, but they get Chris Mullin to stay for the good years he has left and don't trade him for Eric Dampier, which is what they did. They ended up drafting Mark Jackson in the second round in '97. So I don't know if they get another lottery pick. So they obviously miss out on KG and Tim Duncan and even Jason Richardson. But you have a franchise player like Weber, you can build a team around him. It's easy to build a team. And like you said, bigs came at a premium. The one caveat is Don Nelson. I think Don Nelson survives the end of the world at the time. The owner really liked him a lot. But I think that's the only other caveat that I couldn't think of to change. Pat Riley and some Van Gundys were floating around the league, but I still see Don Nelson surviving the zombie apocalypse. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, and I listened to a podcast recently that Chris Webber did with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, the All the Smoke, where he talks about this. And what's really interesting is I think the perception of Chris Webber and who he is as a person is so different, right? He's kind of seen on the court. I don't want to say he's meek, but he's not a tough guy. Doesn't seem like to have the most forceful personality. But off the court, he was all about player empowerment in his own way. Even when he was choosing his college, a lot of that, the reasoning, behind choosing Michigan over some other schools was because he felt some of the other schools were not being fully honest with him. And, he felt that he's being taken advantage as a young black man. And he always had, this image in his head of who he is as a person and being that alpha personality. And this was a rare chance for a young guy to kind of pick his own destiny, right? If you think about it, if you're a draft pick, you sign that deal, you're generally there for at least 3-4 years. In this case, he would have been there for 15 years, which is crazy to think about, but he makes that decision probably motivated by, the guaranteed money that came with it and the financial security. So it's a really kind of seminal moment in NBA history that he took advantage, he took control of his own fate, his own destiny, and he went on his own path. And he's kind of overlooked in that late 90s, early 2000s era. He just happened to play in an era of some of the best big men of all time. You get KG, Tim Duncan, you have Shaq. I'm sure there's others that I'm missing. But he was still, 4-time All-Star in SAC. He took him to the brink. If it wasn't for some questionable referee decisions, they make the finals. So he is a cornerstone franchise type player that the Warriors let slip through their fingers for a combination of their own incompetence, but also the type of dude that he is, and the fact that he wanted that autonomy and that control over his own destiny.
Yeah, and the Warriors ultimately suffered. They didn't make the playoffs again for 13 years after his rookie season. He like you said, 5 All-NBA teams, 5 All-Star teams, averaged 21 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game, 4 assists a game. He came back after the We Believe year, but his knee was, done for, and he actually retired a Warrior. So, sad face with a tear maybe, or a sad violin or something. But
so he got his happy ending. But yeah, by then he was a shell of himself. So
yeah, it's basically huge what could have been. But I thought Chris Webber was a very notable negative turning point in Warriors history that ended up being a long drought before reaching relevance again.
As you could tell from the podcast and the things that we talked about, the NBA was a very strange place in the late 80s and early 90s that allowed a guy that went number 1 overall to spend just 1 year with that team. Since then, the NBA has, of course, introduced a number of guardrails to protect teams from their own idiocy, and the Golden State Warriors were probably one of the stupidest teams in the NBA at that time. They really have improved leaps and bounds since then, of course, and have since become one of the best organizations in the league and one of the best organizations in sports. But at that time, they were a franchise that just could not hang on to their best players, and they actually experienced something similar with Gilbert Arenas, which we'll cover in a future short, and we cover in depth on episode 1 of the 4040 Vision podcast, so we encourage you to check that one out, or just wait for the short to come out at some point this summer. Thank you guys for checking us out. We hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please make sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, and make sure to check us out on all the major social media platforms at 4040 Vision Pod. Thanks, y'all. Peace out.